Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first ever live NASCAR Fantasy Racing Hangout. We're going to try and do these every week before the race, give you some last-minute kind of real-time tips as to what you should do in the popular NASCAR fantasy games that are all over the web and are so popular. And I'm Charlie Turner from On Pit Row and OnPitRow.com, On Pit Row Magazine soon, and I'm joined by my partner in crime, Dan Beaver. Dan is, of course, the fantasy racing director for NASCAR.com and YahooSports.com and Sports Trade X. He wears many hats, and he's wearing a red one today. How you doing, buddy?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm all right. So we're going for the. We start off our first one of these hangouts where we go to a not typical race, a 600-mile race on a mile-and-a-half track, and I think we want to talk first about the implications of this track and the drivers going on for the Sports Trade X game and that style game. So maybe give everybody, maybe not everybody is familiar with that game, so maybe give a little background on it, and then we'll get into the picks.
And they're probably not familiar with it. It just launched this year, so we're into the 12th race now. So haven't been all that many opportunities to play the game and learn it. And this is an atypical race, but it's a typical track. So there are some benefits to having Kansas and Charlotte in back-to-back weeks. Makes my job a little difficult to try to figure out something new to say about the drivers, since it's two similarly configured mile-and-a-half tracks in consecutive weeks. But it makes the job a little bit more clear-cut. Wouldn't say easier, but certainly take some of the peaks and valleys out of figuring out how to transition from a mile-and-a-half track to a flat 1 mile track or a high bank 1 mile track like we're going to see next week. Sports Trade X, it's a new game. They've been doing daily fantasy for quite some time. Baseball, football, basketball. And they've taken the game that they had there and modified it just a little bit to fit NASCAR. The trick is, or the task is, there are 10 matchups, 2-man matchups versus 2-man matchups. So you're playing to figure out which 2-man matchup is going to be better than the one in the opposite column. This week, for example, we've got... give it a second to show up here. Casey Kane and Paul Menard against Kevin Harvick and Marcus Ambrose. So you have to decide which of those two drivers is going to be better than the other two drivers.
Well, there's a tough pick right off the bat.
And that's I set the rosters, so I try to set them so they're not easy.
You evil bastard, you.
I try to be. You end up with one marquee driver, in this case it's Kane versus Harvick, and one maybe mid-pack driver, Menard versus Ambrose, based on their records. But both of those drivers have been coming on strong recently. So Menard and Ambrose have the capacity to finish in the top 15, top 10. And you try not to let those matchups get too far out of whack. You wouldn't want to have Casey Kane and Kevin Harvick against Paul Menard and Marcus Ambrose. So you pick which drivers are going to do the best. The scoring is based on finishing position, average running position, place differential, and laps led. So there are a couple of things to keep in mind. Not only where the driver is going to finish, but how long they're going to spend in the front of the pack so that you get a good average running position. And if you've got someone that qualifies traditionally poorly, like Matt Kenseth, then you're going to get points for him picking up spots. As of the taping of this, qualifying hasn't happened yet. But for argument's sake, let's say he qualifies down in the 20s like he has for every cookie-cutter race so far this year. If he wins the race, he gets 20 points for his place differential, 50 points for winning the race, and then the average running position, whatever rank he was, he gets up to 50 points for that. Then laps led, the number of actual laps that he led. So you're looking for two things. You're looking for drivers who can overcome a poor qualification, who can run in the front quite a bit. And those two things are kind of balanced. So you might want the pole sitter, even though he's going to could lose positions based on the average running position. if you think he's going to stay in the front of the pack for a considerable amount of time at the beginning and get a good average running position. So it's a slightly different game. It's a play on the pick'em games that are out there, where you pick one driver versus the other. But in this case, you've got 10 matchups, and you've got to get 8 of them, up to 8 of them correct. So if you're not sure about a couple of matchups, you can drop them out.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. So if you're looking at this as to give a tip on how to play this game, where would you look at your stats? Are you going to look at stats? You give more weight to the stats for Charlotte races in particular? Like, you can go back 18 races now at Charlotte and loop stats and pull up averages for those categories you're talking about in scoring. Or do you look at the season overall for these guys, or do you look at the similarly configured tracks? Where do you give the most weight in your analysis?
And every week that kind of changes. There are tracks that the history on the track is more important than the momentum that the driver brings to the course. Road courses would be a perfect example of that. You're going to be more concerned with how a driver ran at Watkins Glen Service Point than you are in how he ran in the 10 races leading up to that. The plate track's kind of the same way, although they're a bit of a crapshoot no matter how you try to look at those. Where the similarly configured mile and a half tracks are concerned, there are so many of them, and they all are different. You're going to hear that a bunch of times from the television media, the politically correct television media, and it's true. The drivers will tell you that all of the tracks behave differently. But once you look at the numbers, once you start to parse out the statistics, it's the same drivers that are finishing at the front of the pack over and over and over again. Earlier this week in the Hangout, on Pit Row Hangout, we talked about there are 3 drivers who've swept the top 10 on cookie cutter tracks. You've got Matt Kenseth, Jeff Gordon, Joey Logano. But there are a bunch of drivers who've swept the top 15. And as parity gets to be more and more important, it gets to be more and more difficult to put those long strings of top 10s together. So in this case, I think the first thing you're looking at is how a driver has done at Texas, Vegas, and Kansas so far this year. Secondarily, you're looking at how they've done at Charlotte throughout their career and in the past three years, the past 6 races. And then your third criteria is how they're doing this year. And that might change depending on which driver you're talking about. Joey Logano, his recent record in 2014 is much more important than his cookie cutter record from 2013 or any of those previous stats, and certainly more important than his overall stats in Charlotte. So you got to, and that's one reason that you want to read the fantasy advice. There's fantasy advice at sportstradex.com. We put up a preview every week. We put up a weekend story that looks at practice and qualification, depending on when those 2 things happen. So you get my insight there, and what I hope I do well. One of the things that I think I do well is, instead of just telling you who I think is going to run well, I tell you why I think they're going to run well. You either accept the premise, or if you don't accept the premise, then you can you at least have that background knowledge of why it is that you would agree or disagree with my picks.
Well, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I have had an argument with Steve Ronkowitz about over the years is the existence or non-existence of momentum. How much weight do you give to momentum when you're evaluating a race like this for say Sports Trade X game?
I think you can't ignore the fact that it exists. You can quibble about what it exactly means and how predictable it is for when the streak's going to start and when the streak's going to end. But you certainly can't ignore the fact that it's there. Joey Logano has been top 5 in all 3 of the similarly configured mile and a half tracks. That is a strong indication that he's going to finish in the top 5 again. You get a driver like Greg Biffle, who's coming in with something like 80 consecutive races where he's running at the end. you got a pretty good shot that or a pretty good chance that he's going to be running at the end of this race, probably on the lead lap, and that puts him in a position where he can make up some spots at the end of the race. So it's a huge factor in how drivers are going to run up until you get to the restrictor plate super speedways. Then streaks can come to an end immediately. Momentum makes absolutely no difference there whatsoever. Driver can dominate the top 10 and make a mistake and fall out of the draft in the last 2 laps and finish in the 20s. So their momentum doesn't matter, and I'm not sure that it matters on road courses. But on the unrestricted intermediate speedways, the 1.5 and 2 mile tracks that are all shaped about the same, it's a huge factor.
So is it? And I put up the link. Hopefully that's right. If you can see the screen there, Dan, is at sportstradex.com. Hopefully they can. If you're watching, you can go right to that link and join up, get an account, and start playing. When you talk about, I mean, there are people that refer to momentum almost like this magic thing. Is it just is momentum just a function of a team getting it all together for a period of time? They're finally hitting their stride. Everybody's kind of meshing. Drivers going into tracks that he's comfortable with. Is it that, or is it a hot streak?
I think it's mostly confidence. Confidence starts with the driver and the crew chief, but the team has to have it also. And if the team doesn't have confidence, if they don't have that background of succeeding, then they're going to be a little tentative when the car comes into the pits. They're going to be more prone to make mistakes in the garage before the car gets out on pit row in the first place. And it doesn't take much. It takes 1/10 of a second or a couple of tenths of a second in the pits to make a huge difference in what happens on the track. You've got someone that is coming out. We talked about Danica Patrick a couple of weeks ago on the on pit row hangout. When she's coming in the top 15, coming out around 20th, it doesn't take long for those mistakes to multiply and drop you off the lead. But the other side of the coin, the opposite of that is true. If you're coming in 5th or 6th and you're going out 2nd or 3rd where you can sniff the lead, then you're more likely to do well. Momentum is a factor of that. Momentum contributes to that. Then the driver, even if they come out a little bit behind, the driver knows they can finish in the top 5. They know they know they can do it because they've recently done it, and they get up on the wheel just a little bit further and drive just a little bit harder.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I'm still not sure that I totally buy into it, but there's certainly 2 sides to that argument. We don't want to spend the whole show on Sports Trade X, but if you're interested in watching this and you haven't got an account, go to sporttradex.com. I've got it here on the screen. You can just click over there and sign up for an account. You can play for money, right? You can actually win money in this deal.
There's there's some great odds there also. There's one game there called the Bankroll Builder. There are 8 people in the game. 5 of them win money. For $5.50 entry fee, you're going to win $8. So you're not going to get rich on it, but you build up that $2.50, add it to your total, and keep playing those games. And if you're a fantasy player, surely you think you can beat 3 other people out of 8. If you can't beat 3 other people, then you probably want to keep playing the free games.
You just need to watch this show. You're going to score.
Yeah, I've managed to build up some money in things like football and baseball where I have no clue what I'm doing.
I bet you have. Well, a lot of it is just not going crazy, right? It's just make your picks. I had a fantasy racing expert tell me one time, it's all about the stats. Just go with the stats. Don't get artistic with your picks. And I think probably if I had done that over the years, I would have gotten more right than I have in the past. But to me, it's kind of fun to figure it out with more than just stats too. So if you could go to Sports Trade X and you could figure out a way to get into one of those 8-person games where Ronkowitz and I are one of the 8. You really improve.
Then you only have to beat one person.
One more. That's right. So, all right. Well, that's it for Sports Trade X this week. We'll talk about it again next Thursday when we come back and do this again. I think it's going to be Thursday. It might be Friday. We haven't figured that part of it out exactly. Follow the On Pit Row Facebook page for now, or the NASCAR Hangouts Google Plus community, and we'll keep you posted as to the times for these shows. And you can also watch the replays on at onpitrow.com on the On Pit Row YouTube page, and the Facebook page will have the replay up until next Tuesday, so you can watch them all there. And if you wait till next Tuesday to watch, you'd be picking yourself. But, so let's talk about the Yahoo game. Ian's also the. Are you still the project coordinator over there?
No, I've never been the project manager there. I just write for them. Okay. But they kind of lost their PM some time back. So if you have any questions, if the players have any questions about it, send it to me. I direct it to the head of games. Eventually, he gets back to me, and we answer those questions. So I'm I don't. What's the old line? I do not get to drive the train. I cannot ring the bell. But if the darn thing jumps the track, guess who catches hell? So I don't have any control over it, but I'll certainly answer the questions and get the questions to the people that do have control over it.
Well, the other thing we're going to try to do with this Hangout each week is there is a comment function. We haven't set it up for this show because this is our first show. We're still kind of playing around with our format. We're going to be adding some features to this as we go along, but we plan to have the ability to ask questions during the Hangout, and perhaps at some point even have you join in on the show. So we'll see how that goes, but looking forward to it. But you can, in the meantime, you can send Dan you can send him an email or send us a message. We'll forward it to Dan and get your answers for you. So the Yahoo game is most people, I think, if they play fantasy sports at all, are familiar with the Yahoo racing game. It has to be the biggest, isn't it? It's certainly, I think, the longest running.
Yeah, to both. It has the most players, and it's been around the longest. I've been writing for them since about 2007, I think. So this is my 2006, 2007, somewhere in there. And you can send me if you're not following me on Twitter, follow me at Fantasy Race, and then send me messages there. That's where I get most of the comments. Yahoo seems to be simple, and turns out to not be most of the time. All you got to do is pick one driver from Group A, two drivers from Group B, and one driver from Group C. And you just got to get the best driver in each of those. 9 options in Group A, about 16, I think, in Group B, a bunch in Group C, but only 3 or 4 that really matter. So you wouldn't think it was all that difficult, but it is, because you've got to find those drivers not only when they're going to be the best value this week, but when it's going to be one of their 9 best races, because you only pick them 9 times out of the 36 race schedule. So it'd be last year it'd have been easy to put Jimmy Johnson or Matt Kenseth on your roster and just leave them there, but you'd exhaust them pretty quick. And Jimmy Johnson traditionally ends pretty well, so you want to make sure you get to the chase with some picks for him. So you're always looking at a little bit of who's going to do well this week, what's going to get me the most points, and allocation management. You can't exhaust your drivers right off. Jeff Gordon won last week. Certainly should have been on your roster. Could win again this week. He tends to be a streaky driver, so he's a driver that could stay on your roster if you need him. One challenge this week is they lock the rosters before qualification. Charlotte always likes to throw a monkey wrench into the works with their Thursday qualifications. So if you didn't get your roster set last night, Wednesday night this week, there's actually a little bit of good news since it comes on the heels of Kansas. 2 cookie cutter races in a row. The drivers who ran well last week probably going to be about the same drivers who run well this week. So if you got stuck with last week's roster, it's better than it could be at almost any other time during the year.
I'm looking at the loop data stats for the Coca-Cola 600, the last 18 races. So I mean, this is going back too far to be for the overall stats to be real relevant, but there you can certainly look at trends. And the top five drivers in driver rating, Jimmy Johnson is by far number one, but you got a couple other drivers in here that I would say if you're going to put value on momentum, they don't have much value. Kyle Busch is second in driver rating, and Denny Hamlin's fifth. Casey Kane's in there in third. I mean, the only driver that seems to have any momentum here is maybe Matt Kenseth in my mind.
Yeah, and I've had this conversation with the guys over there in NASCAR stats. It's gotten to the point where that particular bit of data isn't terribly meaningful.
Not anymore.
It's just way too.
Yeah,
it's just way too broad.
Yeah, they need to go like 6 races back and cut it off.
Yeah, and so that's one reason that you want to read the Yahoo preview. That's about where I go back on most of the stats that I report. And even then, it's not always meaningful. You've got Denny Hamlin coming into this race, I think, with a 7-race top 10 streak. But he has struggled badly on the cookie-cutter tracks in the last couple of starts in 2 of the 3 races this year. And you can't say that he's a favorite. He might run well, and I ranked him in the top 4 this week in the Yahoo preview, but he's certainly not a no-brainer. So even though he's got momentum on his side from the last 3.5 years at Charlotte, there are times when you just have to say, okay, that stat doesn't work this week. This is why it doesn't work. So you have to be flexible. You have to go into the weekend with something in mind. Otherwise, you've got way too many numbers to try to wade through. But when you see that there's a reason why the stats may no longer stand up, you've got to be willing to change course. And Hamlin's one of those. Jeff Gordon has struggled in the last 3 years at Charlotte, but he comes in with a second at Texas, his victory last week at Kansas. So now he's got momentum on this track type. So you throw the bad numbers out, and you look at his recent momentum this season versus his momentum at Charlotte. It's a balancing act.
Another driver that jumps out at me that does have pretty good numbers here traditionally and does have a good season going in 2014 is Joey Logano. I think you might have gave him a call out on Tuesday on the On Pit Row Hangout. Is he one of your picks this week?
Definitely. And I think he was my pick on Tuesday to win the race.
Yeah,
nothing's changed my mind between then and now. A 4th at Vegas and Kansas, and his victory at Texas. They definitely has this track type figured out. One reason for that, I think, is the new qualifying format. He's the only driver to have advanced to every final round of qualification on an unrestricted track. He started further back at Richmond when that race was set by practice times, and he started further back at Talladega because he didn't sniff the right draft there at the end. But he's been starting in the top 10 in every other race. For that reason, he stays out of trouble early. He needs confidence, still a young driver, and he gets that quickly, racks up some good stats at the beginning. He was dominant at Kansas. He was dominant at Texas. So there's no reason to think that he won't be dominant here. Plus, he has top 10s in more than 50% of his Charlotte starts. Most of those came after he started further back in the field, outside the top 10. The only time he started in the top 10, he faded a little bit. But I don't think that will happen even if he starts in the top 10 this week. He's got to be a favorite to win. He's definitely a favorite to score a top 5. And being in Yahoo's Group B, that's enough to make him a top choice.
Well, what else is your team going to look like if you're setting your roster today with what would it's hard to do this because saving your allocation or doing your allocation management, which we'll probably get into that more maybe next week. We have more time to talk about allocation management, but this is one of those tracks where kind of have to watch that, don't you? Because it is a 1.5-mile track, and there's going to be a lot of these, and you can't use up the best driver too early.
There are dark horses at Charlotte and the other 1.5-mile tracks. They get there by hard work. They get there by putting a lot of emphasis on those tracks. So what I like to do is start with 2 drivers that start with 50% of my roster being safe picks. In Group A, that would be a Matt Kenseth or a Jimmy Johnson or a Jeff Gordon. And then the next pick, someone that's a little more on the edge, with the idea that if they run well in practice and they qualify well, you can start them. In Group B, Joey Logano, Carl Edwards have been the class of the field on unrestricted intermediate speedways. They anchor the roster, but you might want to put a Jamie McMurray in there. And then after he ran well in the All-Star race last week, he steps it up in big races. If he practices well, then he gets the start. You probably wouldn't want to start 2 dark horses in Group B, but one of the 2. Down in Group C, Austin Dillon, Kyle Larson are going to get exhausted before the end of the year. There's no way to avoid that without losing a lot of points along the way. So whenever a Trevor Bayne shows up, he may only finish 15th. He may get outrun by both Larson and Dillon, but he's worth starting because the difference between where he finishes and where they finish in this race is not going to be as much as it is on some other tracks. So I like to think in terms of that 50-50 rule. Half of them safe picks and half of them dark horses. And everybody puts so much emphasis on these tracks. The similarly configured 1.5-mile tracks are 25% of the schedule. You add in the 2-mile tracks of Auto Club in Michigan, it's 33% of the schedule. That doesn't count Darlington or Homestead because I think of those as outliers.
Right.
So you've got 33% of the races that are identical, practically identical, at least from a statistical standpoint. You're going to get dark horses. You're going to get a team that focuses on one track versus the other. So you get a Casey Mears that finishes in the top 15. He's ecstatic. And you get the occasional top 10 from some of these drivers, too, if they get the strategy right in the closing laps.
Well, let me ask you about a couple of dark horses before we get out of here this week. One would be, do you have any temptation to pick Tony Stewart this week?
No. He was struggling on the 1.5-mile tracks last year before his injury. So while he is recovering, it's still taking a while for him to get that momentum. In 3 races this year, he finished 33rd at Vegas, 10th at Texas, and 20th at Kansas. Last year, in the first 5 races on similarly configured 1.5-mile tracks, he had a 7th at Charlotte in this race and an 11th at Vegas. So there's not a lot there to go on. The good news is that 7th did come in the Coke 600. He's good over long runs where he can adjust in the car. He's a smart driver. Chances are he could get a top 10 and make my prediction look bad, but it's an outside chance, and it's just not worth risking at this point. Wait for him to get that momentum in the late summer, early fall, and that's when you're going to want to ride the Tony Stewart horse.
How about a Clint Boyer? Boyer would have been a pick, I would think, last year going into this race. Is that Michael Waltrip Racing Team, have they fallen to a different tier at this point?
Yeah, at this point, they came into the Coke 600 with a 15th at Texas and an 5th at Kansas. So they had momentum on their side. This year, he fits in the exact same category as Stewart. 20s at Vegas and Kansas, a top 10 at Texas. The weight of the stats are against him, just not a safe pick. If he practices well on Saturday and he's on your provisional roster, he could be that dark horse, though. Did he win this race last year? He won one of the races.
I think he did. I think he won the fall one, the fall race.
He won the fall 2012 race.
Okay.
So He's capable of winning, but I believe that was a little strategy. The top three that race uh, stretched their fuel.
Yeah, yeah.
Not to take it away from him, and he finished second back in 2007. But those are his only top fives here. He's an all or nothing driver, and he's more. He finishes outside the top 10, top 15 more often than he finishes inside that mark.
Two other drivers, real quick, that are certainly going to be popular picks for a number of people we've not talked about at all: Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Kyle Busch.
Junior ran extremely well in the two cookie cutter races when he stayed on the track. There was that Texas kerfuffle where he misjudged the bottom of the track. Goodness knows where he would have finished. His statistics aren't enough to make him a favorite, other than or in the past. But the fact that he's ran so well on the 2 mile-and-a-half tracks, I think he's got a pretty good shot at it. He's not on my roster this week, but he's going to be on a lot of people's rosters. And I think that Superman paint scheme is going to be good for a couple of positions.
Yep.
So top 10, maybe top 5.
Okay. Any final comments before we sign out this week?
I don't think so. This is one of my. I say this almost every week. One of my favorite races. One of my favorite tracks. I like them all, but I love this 600-mile race. It will hit a couple of points where it's dull, maybe for a little while the drivers catch their second breath, but it gives you plenty of time to get your chips and salsa out, drink a couple of beers. I love these longer races. And coming on the heels of the Indy 500 earlier in the day, there's no better day in motorsports than Memorial Day Sunday. The Monaco Grand Prix. We used to have a Grand Prix or a sports car race in Lime Rock, I think, on this weekend. There's always some World of Outlaws action floating around out there. This is just a great week to be a race fan.
Yeah, the thing I like about it. For me. It's background music all day. Memorial Day. I have all those races on if I can get them. A lot of times they're on the radio. They don't have to even be on TV. I like hearing it, listening. It's been part of my Memorial Day since I was a little kid, and I can't wait. It's going to be great. And the fantasy, the fact that you can actually have something riding on the game on the races is kind of cool. It adds something to it. So this has been good. I hope everybody enjoyed it. If you have comments, please leave comments below the Facebook player or on the Yahoo page or when I post this up at onpitroad.com. We'd like to hear what you'd like to hear us say and what you'd like us to talk about. If you have suggestions, what can we do better? So thanks again, Dan. I'll talk to you soon, if not before Tuesday, certainly on Tuesday on the On Pit Row NASCAR Hangout.
Look forward to it.
All right. Happy Memorial Day, everybody.